Hello class. In the previous lecture we have seen that is twin tube telescopic shock absorber, which is half 70% filled by the oil and remaining is filled by the air. So nowadays we are using a gas filled shock absorber suspension system. Whatever the disadvantage I have told in the case of those telescopic twin, that is emulsion formation of the air and oil, means foam formation हो जाता है while vehicle traveling at high speed due to the vibration or due to the sudden deceleration or the sudden acceleration of the vehicle, or due to too much bump coming from or too much shock coming from the bottom of the roadways. Due to that वाइब्रेशन, ये जो ऑयल होता है और एयर प्रेजेंट होता है सस्पेंशन सिस्टम में, दैट गेट मिक्स टुगेदर इन ऑर्डर टू फॉर्म अ फोम और emulsion. So that emulsion is not that much viscous as oil itself. Okay, so whenever such emulsion traveling through narrow hole, they are not giving that much damping characteristic as oil giving alone. Okay, so because of mixing of air and the oil, the emulsion is there, and that emulsion is very low viscosity. Okay, so that was the problem in case of the previous case. So to overcome that thing, nowadays we are using a gas filled shock absorber. So those gas are normally having high atomic gas. High atomic means not like a very heavy or flammable gas. We are using a nitrogen. Okay, so which having a somewhat big molecules that not easy to mix with the oil. Okay, so they are having some different viscosity, so we are using a pure nitrogen. Okay, so that nitrogen not readily mixed with the oil which are used in case of the suspension system, so emulsion formation is not there. Okay, so basically there are two type of shock gas filled shock absorbers are there. One is a twin tube and is a monotube. Okay, so this is a monotube and this is a twin tube. First of all, this is the twin tube. So this is a completely steel, as we are using oil that nitrogen gas into it. So there is a only nitrogen, so we are not allowing to enter air or mixture of gases into it. So we are this both tubes or both type of suspension system are completely sealed. Okay, so here there are two tubes are there. This one is the one tube, this is outer is the another tube, and there is a space is present in between this tube, these two tubes, and this is the annular space present. Okay, this annular space up to this marking is filled by the oil, and above there is a nitrogen. This white color space indicating a nitrogen. This sky blue color portion is nothing but the oil. Okay, and this is a piston, or you can say damper piston, and this is the steam of that piston. Okay, which is going inward and outward with respect to the shock. Okay, so those piston having very narrow hole here. Okay, which is not shown right now, but it having a narrow hole, very small hole. Okay, that across the piston oil come go upward or downward. Oil can travel across the piston because of the presence of the narrow hole. Okay, that you have to remember. This portion of the shock is bolted to the wheel, and this portion is bolted to the frame. Okay, frame of the vehicle. So whenever shock coming across the roadways, that time what happen, this outer tube or this entire outer tube inner tube assembly will move upward, and this rod move inward into the space. So whenever it moving inward, that time क्या हो रहा है, across the holes present in this piston. Okay, viscous oil try to move in upward direction, it travel in upward direction. At the same time, extra volume of the rod get into the tube. Okay, पहले क्या था, ये जो रॉड है एक्स्ट्रा एंटर हो रहा है ना, जैसे जैसे ट्यूब ऊपर जा रहा है वैसे वैसे, और ये रॉड भी नीचे आ रहा है, सो इट एंटरिंग इनटू द ट्यूब. सो जितना वॉल्यूम नीचे से ऊपर जा रहा है उतने ही वॉल्यूम का क्या हो रहा है, हमारा रॉड अंदर जा रहा है. सो ड्यू टू द movement of the oil upward and due to the movement of the rod inward into the tube, some of energy get absorbed. Okay, this is damping action. Whenever rebounding is there, means अब शॉक चला गया, इन दोनों के बीच में स्प्रिंग भी होता है. ओके, स्प्रिंग इज देयर. Okay, so that spring get rebound or start to form their compression cycle, expansion cycle. Because whenever this tube is going upward and rod coming downward, that time in between this, there in between the movement of these two things, spring get compressed. Spring is there. You can see the spring. I'm showing you the spring. Okay, the spring is there. This spring is there. Okay, for the simplicity, I have not shown the spring. More okay, like this spring is there. Okay, spring you can see. So spring get compressed in between them. For the simplicity, I have not shown here. Okay, so in between this rod and this shell, what happens? Spring get compressed, and whenever spring get expand, that time this rod coming out from the this thing and this thing going downward. So again, it whenever it coming upward, that time that much volume, okay, that much volume of this rod is coming out from the upside of this tube. Okay, so that time, for the sake of in seconds, milliseconds, vacuum initiate, and that vacuum initiation of vacuum get vanish by coming extra by entering a extra oil from bottom to above the piston. But at the same time, whatever the excess oil coming up at the upward portion of this piston also want to move downward side, because piston what moving upward, and it try to what creating a vacuum, vanishing the vacuum, and again third time it try to allow to move whatever the oil present at the above of this piston to go downward. Okay, so say three things are happening in a series. Okay, so because of this moment, damping of the force get take place. Okay, in case of the monotube, it is very simple. In case of the monopiston or monotube, we are having the spring as in between this rod and this thing. Okay, in addition to that, we are having one more piston, that is free piston. Okay, below this free piston, gas is present, nitrogen is present. Here in the annular space, nitrogen is present. Here below the free piston or the floating piston, nitrogen is present. Okay, nitrogen is present. So whenever, and this again this piston also having a narrow hole across for the transportation of the oil. So whatever the oil present at upside and bottom side of this piston may pass across the piston through those narrow hole. Okay, but this piston not having any kind of the narrow holes. It is a completely sealed piston. So because of the presence of this piston, whatever the oil, whatever the gas present below it will not enter into above. Okay, so it is properly having a tight sealing between them. Okay, so whatever the gas is here is remain filled by the gas, but it is a pressurized gas is there. Okay, at normal condition also it is pressurized. So whenever road shock is coming from the bottom, that time this thing is going upward and rod going inward. Okay, so whenever rod this thing going upward, that time, and this coming inward, that time oil present below this thing are going upward direction across the narrow hole. At the same time, downward movement of this rod exert the pressure on this piston, and the pressurized nitrogen which is present at the bottom again get pressure, again get somewhat pressurized. Okay, and movement of the oil from the bottom going to upward direction across the narrow hole. This is the compression cycle of the spring. When rebounding is take place, that time again this outer tube are moving downward and this rod coming outward. That time again, whatever the oil present at the above try to entering into the bottom side of piston across the narrow hole, and whatever the pressure, whatever the gas pressurized previously, it start to relieve the pressure and pushing piston upward direction. This free piston in upward direction, consequently pushing this oil and consequently pushing the rod outside. Okay, so this is the thing is take place outside, across the piston, that is movement of the oil through that narrow hole. At the same time, pressure acting on the floating piston to further compress the nitrogen gas. All those work together in order to push piston rod outside during the rebounding cycle. Okay, so this thing is take place in series of cycles, compression cycles and rebound cycle, that is expansion cycle of spring, compression cycle of spring and the expansion cycle of spring, and just those cycles are responsible for the transportation of the oil, viscous oil, across the narrow hole. Okay, so nowadays this monoshock is very popular and it is used in case of the two-wheeler. Okay, because it is having a what good efficiency as compared to this one. Okay, and it is very simple in construct, not complicated. So nowadays you can see this is the pistons. Okay, this is a that monoshock I have we have seen in the previous slide. Okay, and this is the versions of the monoshock nowadays we are using. So this is a very conventional one. Through this plug we are charging the nitrogen into it. Nowadays after that, this is a decarbon internal floating piston. Okay, so internal flow piston internally है उसमें. After that remote piston reservoir. So यहाँ से ये जो है piston, ये जो upper portion है, that we have take it remote place, और through this hose एक अनदर पोर्शन यूज अनदर सिलेंडर यूज किया है, उसमें हम फ्लोटिंग पिस्टन देके नाइट्रोजन चार्ज बॉटम साइड में हम नाइट्रोजन चार्ज करते हैं. ओके, दिस इज अनदर वर्जन. एंड नाउ डेज वॉट एवर वी आर यूजिंग दिस काइंड ऑफ मोनोशॉक एट द बॉटम ऑफ अवर एट द रेयर सस्पेंशन ऑफ अवर टू व्हीलर. ओके, दैट इज जो हमारा लिंकेज होता है, ट्रेलिंग लिंक सस्पेंशन सिस्टम होता है. ओके, उस ट्रेलिंग लिंकेज बोथ साइड में इस टाइप के टू शॉक एब्जॉर्बर होते हैं, या इन सम केस ऑफ इफ यू ऑब्जर्व यामाहा एफजी व्हीकल एट द बॉटम बिलो द सीट. Okay, you can see a single such a type of suspension with having a canister into it. Okay, so this is the cast frame. Into it two cylinders are parallelly located. Okay, and through internal groove they are connected, and into the second cylinder one rubber bag is there. Okay, this rubber bag separate the oil and nitrogen. Okay, so this bag is there, and below this under this bag nitrogen is filled. Okay, pressurized nitrogen is filled. So this is the next version or latest version of our monoshock we are using nowadays. Okay, and now as I told you, this in between this rod and this tube, means it between this flange and this flange spring is there. Okay, as we have shown here, this rod ये जो मूव होगा अंदर बाहर, इसके फ्लेंज और आउटर ये जो ट्यूब है उसके फ्लेंज के अगेंस्ट में हमने कॉइल स्प्रिंग माउंट किया. सो स्प्रिंग टुगेदर डैम्प, इट्स कॉल्ड एज अ शॉक एब्जॉर्बर. ओके, ओनली स्प्रिंग नहीं यूज किया हमने, डैम्पर के साथ स्प्रिंग यूज किया. सो इट्स कॉल्ड एज अ shock absorber. So nowadays such a type of shock absorber we are using. Okay, this is called as a nitrox or nitrogen filled suspension system or shock absorber. Okay, so this is the thing we have easily noticed in nowadays two wheeler. Okay, thank you.